Hey guys, today we're going to talk about Chapter 2, Section 1, how the cell exchanges things with its environment. We have two objectives for this video. I want you to understand that cells have to get things in and out in order to survive. And I also want you to be able to tell me how they do that. How do they get stuff in? How do they get stuff out? So first of all, let's remember that the cell's kind of like a factory. It has parts that all work together. They have to be able to obtain the things that they need, create the products that they need, and then they have to be able to get rid of the waste from that. Take a minute and pause me. All right. So one way that a cell gets things in and out of the cell is called diffusion. It's when it goes from a place where it's really, really crowded to where it's less crowded. It takes place across the cell membrane. In other words, it can come across anywhere it needs to. Doesn't take any energy for the cell to do this, kind of like hopping on a raft and floating down a river. A special type of diffusion is called osmosis, and they use that because water is so vital that it has its own special term. So take a minute, pause me, and write that down. Now, if I want to move something small across the cell membrane, such as water or oxygen, it can just seep right on through the holes in the cell membrane, kind of like water drains out of a strainer when you make macaroni and cheese. Water can do that, oxygen can do that, but sugar and amino acids can't. They have to be able to go through these little bitty doorways in the cell called protein doorways. Take a minute and pause me and write this down, and then we're going to talk about that. All right, so these doorways are found in the cell membrane, and amino acids and proteins and small particles like that can come in and out. Now, if you look right here, you'll see there are two ways that they do that: passive transport and active transport, and we're going to take just a second to talk about those. But before we do, pause me and write that down. All right, so passive transport is when they move from where it's really crowded to where it's not crowded. It goes through those protein doorways. They go from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So they're going with the natural flow, okay? They don't have to use any energy. They can just go right on through those doorways. Take a minute and write that down. Now, active transport's kind of a little bit similar in that it still goes through those protein doorways, but it's going the wrong way, kind of like going the wrong way down a one-way street or forgetting your sunglasses on the beach and having to walk up the river to get them. They're going from where it's less crowded to where it's more crowded. And just like if you were to walk upriver, it takes energy to do that, okay? Now, think about it. When we talked about earlier in the chapter, we talked about cells and how they make this stuff called ATP, this energy, this gas, this fuel for the cells. Think for just a second where that comes from. Yeah, the mitochondria. That's right, the powerhouse of the cell. So energy comes from that ATP that's made right there in the mitochondria of the cell, okay? Oops. All right, take a minute and write that down for me, please. All right, now active transport, passive transport, diffusion, osmosis, all those things are great if you're talking about very small particles. But what if the particle is big, like a protein or a complex sugar, and it has to get through that cell membrane? Well, your cell has to be able to do that too, and we're going to talk about that next. So take a minute and write that down. Okay, so if I want to bring something into the cell, it's called endocytosis. Endo, like you're entering. See my mouse up there? Now, endocytosis is how the cell brings in large particles. Again, complex sugars, proteins, things like that. Here's what happens. So this big piece comes up, it attaches itself to the cell membrane. The cell membrane wraps itself around it, pinches off, and makes this thing called a vesicle, okay? And then it sucks that vesicle in. Now remember, at no time can that cell membrane be compromised or broken, because think about it for a second. What would happen if it was? Yeah, it would pop. All the stuff would come oozing out, right? So this is how things get into the cell that are too large to fit through that cell membrane. Okay? Take a minute, pause me, and write that down. Okay, so remember we talked about these vesicles. It's just a fancy way of saying a sac, a compartment, a package, and that's what we call that part of the cell membrane that wraps around that big piece as it brings it in, okay? When we talked about the Golgi complex and the endoplasmic reticulum, remember how we talked about how the Golgi complex packaged things? Well, it packages things in these vesicles. Because remember, we talked about how just like you can't send a vase to your great-great-grandma Bertha without putting it in a box and putting a label on it and taking it to the post office, your cell can't either. Okay? So those are called vesicles. Take a minute, pause me, and write that down. All right, now, what if I need to get something out of the cell, like a waste product or a dead, damaged, worn-out organelle that doesn't work anymore? Yep, exocytosis, just like exiting, okay? Now, has to get through the cell membrane, but remember that cell membrane can't be popped or compromised, just like I can't bring an elephant through the wall without destroying my wall, and I don't want to do that because my cells want to keep living. So, they go to the ER or the Golgi complex where they're packaged up, travel to that cell membrane that merges with the cell membrane, and then it's released. It's called exocytosis. Okay? Take a minute, pause me, and write that down. All right. So I know that was a super quick video, and you may need to go back and watch that a couple times and read over your notes. Cells have to take in materials and get rid of waste in order to perform their daily functions. If they don't, remember, they'll get full of trash or they won't have enough of the things they need. In the very next section, we're going to talk about cellular respiration and photosynthesis, in which they take in products and then they create energy. Well, they have to be able to get those products in order to do that, correct? We talked about diffusion. Goes from crowded to less crowded, does not take any energy, goes right through that cell membrane, and this is a way we get small particles into our cell. Talked about osmosis, and that's just a fancy way of saying diffusion of water. Passive transport, remember they're going through those protein doorways. They're not cutting across anywhere they want. Again, high to low, just like floating down a river. You're being passive. You're not using any energy. And once again, this is for small particles only. Active transport is going upstream, just like if you forgot your sunglasses on a picnic table. Okay? Endocytosis, large particles coming into the cell, and we have to have energy for endocytosis to take place. And remember that energy is ATP, and it's made in the mitochondria. And then we have exocytosis. That's where large particles get out of the cell. Okay? So I hope this video helps. I know it was short, quick, to the point. But I wanted to go over the notes with you, give you something to write down, to remember, kind of go over that vocabulary again. So take a minute and pause me and write this down. And I hope you guys have a great day. And I will see you next time.